It never ceases to amaze me how cheesy I can make those opening shots. Selfless promotion. All right. We appear to be live, and hopefully I've got it working. We'll start yammering right at 6 o'clock. So I'm going to do a song and dance install until then and try to figure out where the chat box is. Hopefully I find it as fast as I did last time, because I think I don't want to add an option or a question. Oh, write a comment. There we go. Welcome. Oops, spell it right. Welcome. Boy, I obviously do not know how to type tonight. I'm getting better, though. I did find the chat pretty fast. Alright, there we go. Yeah, I am all chatted out, and I will continue to stall until oops, I'm going to make that smaller. Woo, look at that. Now I can see everything. Outstanding. So I'm going to do a song and dance until... Hey, Richie. Oh, nice. That's awesome. Welcome. I'm going to do a little song and dance here until 6 o'clock, and we'll get started. I got a couple of good questions that got sent in, and we'll get those covered. And anybody else who has anything interesting, feel free to post. And I can safely say you're the first person that I know of from the Anita tribe, and welcome. Let me know if you got any questions, and feel free to chime in, because if you've had the pleasure of studying any of the tradition of your people, you probably got some insight way more relevant than me. It's always fascinating how different cultures may use an herb in completely different ways. Same genus, same species, literally just because of their community's experience. It can be oh so different, so we can always learn more from all the different traditions. Yeah, that's for tomorrow. Okay. I got too many pieces of paper as always. We'll get started here in about 9 minutes as some more folks wander in here. Hopefully I've got all the questions that have been emailed or posted. Hey, Maureen. Yeah, we're getting people from around. Oh, bummer. Yeah, Durango, and the conference out in Durango was a hoot. My first time, and I haven't emailed them back, but hopefully I'll go again next year. I'm going to try to work that into my schedule. I don't think they've set the dates yet, but super fun conference, beautiful location. Durango rocks, and I had a blast hiking around. It's funny, I flew into Salt Lake City and drove from Salt Lake to Durango, and not a bad drive. It was 6 hours, I think. I'm sure I could have made it faster, but was able to stop at Mesa Verde and hiked out to the petroglyphs there. Absolutely amazing, and for a real hike, which, you know, I don't often give the Park Service kudos for their appropriate writing of how difficult the trail was. So it was, probably because it was challenging, because I'm terrified of heights, and so there was a little bit of heights, and amazing people who must have lived out there. And then went to the Arches National Park, which was super cool. Few too many people out there for my taste, but it was still a beautiful sight of what nature can create out there. So you're lucky that you're out there in that area all the time. What do we got? 5 minutes. All right. It's always funny, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to have enough material to cover in 2 hours, and I'm going to have to and always I run out of time at the end, especially as people post a few extra questions. So feel free to post anything. I won't say I'm no longer able to check my email, but pretty much can't. I'll screw up the video, I'm sure. And, well, actually, Richie, you have been here before. I recognize your name, I think, or I've seen it shown up somewhere. Anybody doesn't know it? I'm Bob from Traditional School of Herbal Studies. Babble incoherently Western and Chinese herbal medicine if I'm able to. Oops. Gotta get that. There we go. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's funny, just as I was just like, oh, I got to talk about monkeypox. I will add that one to it. How did that not pop into my head to talk about? Oh, I see. All right, I got you. Let's see if it fits in anywhere else. Yeah, it might be a standalone there. All right, almost there. Can't actually see the clock ever. I don't know whether you noticed. Oh, awesome. Oh, super cool. Hey, Pickles. I was going to say, Western and Chinese is starting up soon, Richie, so reach out if you haven't to Trisha, and she can get you signed up, or if you're wandering down this way, value added, but of course we've got everything live online. It's a endless learning curve, so I know we've got a couple people who do it all remotely. Even the clinicals aren't quite the same, but they do okay even remotely, so they seem to get it. All right, we'll get started here. 5 minutes it looks like. So far I've been pretty timely. We've got all kinds of interesting questions. Something on saw palmetto, some Japanese mugwort, doggy questions, and ascites. And pretty serious ascites. So, and monkeypox. Can't forget the monkeypox. Can't wait to talk about monkeypox. I will screech like I'm hanging from a tree. No. It has been interesting. I get, I wanted to add that. Can't forget that. Mulberry. White mulberry. Leaf. Dehydration. Death. Yeah, I get all of the emails from the CDC in reference to that because I sign up as a practitioner. So it's always fascinating to see what they're advising and the education that goes with it. And the education is usually super appropriate, just the basic details of what they understand and don't understand. But some of the languaging is always fascinating. I find it interesting and actually surprisingly good sometimes, the way they language some of the stuff. All right. Let's see what we got. 3 minutes. Yay. Conserving my energy before I start babbling incoherently at 400 miles an hour. There we go. All right. I can see everything. Decided to give you all a different view of the classroom today. So I was like, you always end up looking at the boring blackboard, dry erase board. So I got fancy and added some different stuff on there. So now you get to see a different wall and some tables. Ooh, there we go. I even got this cool copper kettle back there. How do? I got you. I got your interesting doggy questions in there. like I count on you to always have a couple of good questions. So far we'll get to everything unless somebody comes up with some really cool stuff. And I got a couple of ones I may start off with my own just to cause some controversy. And all right. What do we got here? 2 minutes. Yay. All right. Sorry, I got a sick brother at the moment. Oops. I got fat fingers too. Can't type. All right, gotta watch my time. Oh, and this is going to turn into a question. All right. Ha! All right. Oh, I got a minute still. Let's see. God, same people. Well, if you haven't heard it already, oops, and the table just typed to my brother's wife. Hopefully it didn't say anything too rude. All right, it's 6 o'clock. Let's get started. So, if you haven't already heard, if you got any extra questions, if you think of anything, because I say some crazy stuff, please feel free to type it into the chat, and I will do my very best to monitor it. I'm here on my own this evening at the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, so I will do my very, very best to monitor and keep up with anything anybody chats. I always try to say I got it, and you'll see me scribbling furiously if I see it. If I completely ignore you for 5 minutes and you've scrolled on by, feel free to type it again and yell at me. So selfless plug, so I do apologize. I'm Bob Linde. I'm an acupuncture physician and a registered herbalist, and I'm the director of the Tradition School of Herbal Studies. And we have a Western and Chinese herbal programs, as well as lots of standalone classes. And we've got an awesome YouTube page, so if you search on YouTube under Tradition School of Herbal Studies, if you can't stay for all of this, or you posted a question and want to check it later, I will post this on the YouTube channel, probably tonight. And if you don't know it, we have an intern clinic here, so our students are getting practice torturing you or your friends 3 nights a week. You definitely need to make an appointment. We have appointments at 6:30 and 8 p.m. And Monday night I supervise acupuncture interns from the local acupuncture colleges, and Tuesday night is Western Herbal Clinic, and Wednesday night is the Chinese Herbal Clinic. And I snuck in an acupuncturist in there too, because she's an old student who's in her last year of acupuncture school. And if I haven't said it before, we've got a new practitioner who, hey, Gianna, we just brought on board a new acupuncture physician I'm really excited about. She actually interned with me for 1.5 years in Monday night student clinic, and from day one she just showed that she was a standout and super smarty smart, and had a firm grasp of herbs with a specialty. She has a degree in nutrition before she ran away to acupuncture school. And she's from Bulgaria, and so brings some traditional medicine from Bulgaria. She lived in the countryside there, and so it's always fun trying to get her to translate Bulgarian herbs into something the rest of us understand. But she's teaching a free class on the effects of diet on mental health, August 31st, which is next Wednesday. And do register just so we know how many people to expect, 6 to 8 p.m. And that's here at the school, 6340 Central Avenue in St. Pete, not at the clinic. And on Thursday, Gray Dean is teaching a free class on Intro to Ayurvedic Medicine. and an intro to doshas. And again, please register if you can. That's September 1st. Also, 6 to 8 p.m. And you can register on traditionsherbschool.com. Wow, now I got a soundtrack in the background. I love it. That was actually my cell phone. And I'm going to do the selfless scroll. If you don't know it, there we go. This is actually not the up-to-date one. If you don't know it, we also have a clinic where we've got, what are we up to now? 4 acupuncturist physicians, 2 herbalists, and a partridge in a pear tree, and a spiritual worker, Lissa, who's also got some classes coming up. She's got a class coming up September 22nd on quieting the overactive mind. She just did one on flower essences that I hear was phenomenal. I missed it, unfortunately. So you can find out more about the acupuncture clinic and all the services we have there. I just updated it yesterday, actually, at acuherbals.com. There's only one C in AcuHerbals. Okay, I think that's all of it. If you're interested in the Chinese program, do sign up soon. We're starting to do interviews probably in the next 2 weeks. And I'm going to say we're about halfway full. It usually starts to fill up by the end of September. So there's still space. And I know we got a few people who just wandered in. So feel free to say who you are, where you're from. And if you got any questions, type it in there. So I'm going to start off actually with my own thing just to be a pain. There's a recent article, and probably it's going to start to show up in all the various spaces, and this happens every year or so. A senator's wife, unfortunately, has passed away, and I would say fairly young. She was in her 60s, I believe. And the coroner is blaming it on an herb, that it would seem that he found white mulberry, which is a Chinese herb, sangye, found sangye, the white mulberry leaf, in her belly, and is saying that it caused her to be dehydrated, and that's what she died of. Unfortunately, she was struggling with some health issues, some blood sugar issues, and weight issues. And those are the ones that were reported in the article. And unfortunately, and I'm not sure why this has been reported in the newspaper. So if you put in a search for white mulberry death, I'm sure you'll find it. I'm not sure why a medical examiner or a coroner is not protecting this person's personal information. I'd say it's none of her business. It's not something that the husband is complaining about or is making a statement. It's literally only the coroner. From the information that was put in there, it was some of the, well, I won't say the worst yellow journalism. There's no shortage of it out there. But it basically implied that somehow finding it in their belly is therefore the cause of death because he was unfamiliar with it. I think that we would find that French fries and Coca-Cola probably is a much higher rate of death if we go on that concept. And unfortunately, there's no one trying to ban soda or fried food. So unfortunately, mulberry leaf is a very common, both our local mulberries here, the leaf, the fruit, the bark is used in many traditions. It grows throughout the world and is generally considered a very safe herb. It is, although I don't use it for blood sugar issues and I don't use it as a diuretic. I tend to use it more for colds and flu kind of issues, specifically for cough. It is in many cultures, it is used for blood sugar, and there's some decent research to support it on that. And ultimately, it is considered one of the safer herbs out there. There's no big cautions. There's no cautions on dosage. And I'm also curious as to how he identified it as white mulberry in her belly. If it was in a capsule, there would obviously have to be a DNA test done on it. And there's been, basically, the medical industry has not shown itself very good. So if it was an extract, that was not tested for. I'd be curious if he was tested for adulterations, i.e. there's some sort of weight loss stimulant in there. And if she was doing anything else, like dry fasting, which I never recommend, but this is one of those things where, hate to start it off on a negative note. We see this repeatedly, that the natural medicine, the herbal industry specifically, is regularly attacked from really bad science. If all science was based on this kind of random conjecture that everything unfamiliar is dangerous, we wouldn't have advanced very far in science. So luckily, in other sciences, they do a good job. In this case, somehow he magically stumbled across this. My guess is they threw a bunch of supplements and medications into a bag, and that probably accompanied to the coroners, and he wasn't familiar with it. I'm going to guess is negative in his personal views on natural medicine, and therefore leapt to the conclusion of it being the cause of death. Although I haven't checked, I'm quite sure that the American Herbal Product Association and the American Botanical Council, I'm sure, has already written a rebuttal on this. So you can, if you search for American Botanical Council, herbalgram.com or .org, I always forget, I'm sure you'll find a rebuttal. I've already read one from Roy Upton, who's a super smart guy. He may have already written it, if not Mark Blumenthal or some of the people on his board who are way smarter than I am, I'm sure have written something. For those of you who are already in the industry, be prepared for us to defend ourselves once again. So I'm going to crank out a couple of the, there's my sheet. I'm going to talk about a couple of the easy ones here. So the question of monkeypox, yay. I was like, how did I not already put that on the list of something I like to talk about? I shouldn't make fun of it. It is I won't even call it a serious disease, because the risk of death of it, although it does exist for people who are very weak in the immune system, and we shouldn't ignore it, because with any kind of virus like this, the potential for mutation to become more serious is certainly that. That said, monkeypox is an issue here in Florida. I don't know if we're up to it. I think we're close to 1,000 cases here. So monkeypox has been around a long time, but it has rarely left the African continent. So it's one of those things that was known to science, but very limited outbreaks, isolated to specific countries or villages, usually, with the once in a blue moon making it to Europe. And I think this may be one of the first times it's made to the U.S. So monkeypox, and it's so funny, we think of pox, we think of like 1600s England, the pox upon you, but honestly we have things like smallpox, and this is a relative of smallpox. So there are many poxes out there, and basically it's usually viral disorders that cause a rash, bumpy things, smallpox being one of those. And this one is spread by skin, I won't say skin-to-skin contact, basically blood contact for somebody who's been infected, and it's probably the reason that we're primarily seeing it in the gay and bisexual community. It is not limited to that, but about 95% of the cases are in there because there's an increased risk of some sort of blood damage from anal sex, that there is an increased risk of that, but it is not limited to that. So it's and it's so funny. It was a nod to people who are having sex but don't identify as gay or bisexual. That the CDC put out that it's primarily within the gay community, the bisexual male community, and with people who are having sex with men who are having sex with men. And it's an interesting distinction that within a smaller group of community, there's a group of people who are just having sex with the same sex, not because of necessarily attraction, but just doing it more for relief and enjoyment rather than attraction. And so it's important to recognize that small subset that is at risk as well. For those, so old fogies like me who were vaccinated as a kid against smallpox, I've already got presumably some protection against that. So if you've been vaccinated with smallpox, you're probably okay, but they do have a more specific vaccine for that that seems to reduce the severity and the risk of catching it. Or wear a condom. That's also it. But one of those things I wouldn't sweat. The question was specifically about L-lysine. And L-lysine and monolaurin. Whew, there I can talk. And monolaurin is a specific chemical extract out of coconut oil. And both of those have some antiviral function. The lysine, an amino acid, is effective in slowing the reproduction of viruses. And so it's not protective against anything. And I may have mentioned this probably last month. And one of the things I've taken out of concern over COVID was lysine, that I was taking it twice a day, morning and evening, because I'm too lazy to take it in the middle of the day, is the thought process, if my immune system is functioning okay, like certainly not perfect, that if I can slow the reproduction of a virus, should I catch COVID or monkeypox or any other interesting things, that my immune system will have a better opportunity to activate and ideally not allow it to get to the point where I get super sick. So from that perspective, I've seen some research to support lysine in reducing symptoms as well as reducing catching it. I know monolaurin is used in a similar way. Honestly, I haven't worked with it very much. I think of it as being more challenging with greater potential for side effects because it's harder to digest than something like L-lysine. I will add to that, and so lysine, I'm going to say, is, I don't know of any reason why somebody wouldn't get it. It's very inexpensive. The dosages, yes, it's hard to hit a high end. The LD50 on it is some ridiculously high number that I don't think any of us can take. And I've given up to 2,000 milligrams every 3 to 4 hours in the past for a short period of time with no problems. A lot of people use it specifically if they have herpes, any type of herpes. I've used it for Epstein-Barr virus to help kind of smack it back a little bit, because Epstein-Barr is a type of herpes virus, just like chickenpox and shingles are all within a complex, just like we have influenza virus, and we have a new strain of influenza that comes by every year. There is coronavirus. There we had SARS. There was MERS in the Middle East, and now our coronavirus. All of those were within that same group of viruses. And so when we look at the herpes virus, all of those, it's very effective. So we always think about it as the herpes virus, but lysine is going to slow the reproduction of any kind of virus. So I would go with that, just as a being on the safe side. And it's key for increasing collagen. So I'm going to look young forever if I keep taking it. That was that page. And nothing wrong with the monolaurin. It's just one I don't work with very often. Let me hit a tough one. One of my students wrote in, she had a family member who was dealing with ascites. And ascites is an interesting little booger. Ascites is when we get fluid accumulation in the abdomen. So, we think about edema as when we got swelling in our ankles, and maybe it's you sat too long, or maybe the kidney function isn't great. We sometimes associate with heart stuff. With certain lung things, you might get a face edema. When we see abdominal edema, any edema is bad. That one's particularly bad. And without a doubt requires the intervention through medical folks, that they need to figure out how come. And I say that it's frequently cirrhosis of the liver, and we immediately always think about alcohol. There are many reasons to get cirrhosis of the liver. It can be hepatitis B or C. Hepatitis A usually doesn't cause it. So cirrhosis, hepatitis, cancer, advanced fatty liver disease. But any way you slice it, it's a serious thing, and it is a symptom that shouldn't be ignored. They should be doing imaging, doing blood work to see what's going on. It's important to know that it's more than just draining the fluids off. It's as I would say with most disorders, and certainly within herbal medicine, we try to fix the underlying cause. In the case of ascites, it's a symptom rather than a disease itself. And when we look at cirrhosis, it's oftentimes, and I think it's 50% of the times, it's cirrhosis of the liver. And one possible cause of that, the most common cause of that, is overconsumption of alcohol. And so stopping anything that dings the liver is the first step of that. Certainly we can use our diuretics, and if we use a diuretic that also happens to be good for the liver, so we can use specifically dandelion. I would argue the dandelion root, but any part can be used. I like, everybody's like milk thistle, and yay, milk thistle's an awesome herb. I would say any of the thistles are liver protective. Every culture uses a thistle. When we look at Celtic medicine, like on all those, the Celtic knots and all of that, there's frequently in everything, all things Celtic, there's some aspect of thistles, specifically the flowers, both from a physical medicine and a spiritual medicine. It's used, the Chinese use it, Ayurvedic uses it. If you didn't know it, artichoke is a thistle flower that we eat, and it's super yummy. I won't say the drawn butter is good for you, but it certainly tastes good. So artichokes, any thistle, milk thistle being amongst those, can be helpful, and all parts of the thistle can be used. The leaves, the roots, the seeds, all have a purpose. You just got to watch that dandelion may cause some constipation. It's drying. Thistles can cause some looser stools if you're not careful. Hey, Stacy. Well, I'm weird. How do I like to eat? I just eat some leaves. I like the bitterness of it in a salad, cooked. All of those are correct. The roots can actually be roasted and chopped up or powdered and used. Not that coffee is good for you much as I love it. But you can use it as either a coffee substitute or added to your coffee. It can be added in decoction, bone broth. But generally we say the roots should be decocted, and the leaves we can make as an infusion. The flowers can also be used. So the right way to consume it is, yes. I literally like it in a salad. I think it has great value. And in this case, we're using it more for its diuretic properties, but the roots in particular are very mineralizing as well. And so you can also do very thinly sliced and pickled. If you don't know it, if you're like, oh, I ate all my pickles, now I got all this pickle juice, you can drop herbs in there that you want to pickle, and usually within 2 weeks you have these wonderful pickled stuff. Oh, yeah. Pesto sounds awesome. Pesto, you make anything you can make pesto out of. That's the best thing. And if you're like, oh, it's too bitter, I don't want to put bitter stuff on my pasta, you should, because you need that bitter to digest it. But you can use like half sweet basil, that you would normally make your pesto out of, and then use the dandelion greens to kind of sneak those in. It's a good way to get your veggies into kids or people who are finicky about their tastes. So as much as you can get it in there. But here's a weird one. I had to double check myself. It's like there's weird stuff stuck in Bob's head that I don't trust myself sometimes, because it's not something I say every day. I don't see ascites and cirrhosis of the liver every day, although we had somebody in student clinic not too long ago, literally I think it was 2 weeks ago. I forget who the student intern was. But it was somebody who was living on the street, who was still using alcohol. That was their drug of choice, although there were some other things that were in there. And he was hoping to get sober and get off the streets, and so we did the very best we could. He did not yet have ascites, but he did have a number of other disorders going on that were probably very soon going to lead to that if he didn't make some changes. And one of the herbs I've occasionally worked with is Ponarnava, and I apologize, Bohovia, I'm not going to say the Latin name right, but Ponarnava is an Ayurvedic herb that one of the specific indications for that is ascites and cirrhosis of the liver. And it happens to be a weed that grows all over the place here in Florida. It's growing out of the cracks of sidewalks, not the place you want to get your herbal medicine from, but very, very easy to find right now. Actually, year-round we can find it. So that's one that can be very, very easy to use. And I'm going to say generally considered safe. And you can use the roots and the aerial parts. Obviously, looking at those things that are causing potential harm to the liver is important. Stopping alcohol. I would say even if alcohol's not an issue, you shouldn't be drinking alcohol if you're in near liver failure. We forget things like our NSAIDs and some of our other pain-killing herbs like Tylenol. Have a very detrimental effect on the liver. One of the more common causes for people to end up in the ER in liver failure is by overdosing on Tylenol. So that's a big scary on that. And there's other prescription meds. There's other over-the-counter meds, alcohol, and then there's things we don't think about, like if you're a painter. You're working with paint. If you're working in a factory where you're exposed to fumes, all of those are really hard on the liver. Gasoline and any of those petroleum products, the more stuff that's non-food that our body, so think any chemicals, likely have a chemical toxicity. This would be if you have ascites, that would be a bad time to buy new furniture, paint your house, buy a new car, new carpeting. All of those things outgas and is processed by the liver. So it sounds silly, but if somebody were in that stage, it's very, very important that we do our very best to minimize chemicals. And I was going to say those kinds of things are not limited to ascites. Those are things that we want to talk about anytime somebody struggles with a physical liver disorder, especially chronic disorders. Yeah, dandelion, man, it's rough. Sourcing that, obviously you can buy it organic. There's lots of certified organic places that sell dandelion root and leaf. But if you're wild harvesting, and it's a weed, depending on where you live, here it's so funny in Florida, we actually covet when we find true dandelion, and we'll put it in a pot and nurture it, because dandelion doesn't grow down here. So we try to limp it along to get it to live, but never lasts very long. We literally do our best to spread the seeds whenever we find it. And I will caution, there are some dandelion lookalikes down here, and some of those have a toxicity to them, so I make sure you got your plant ID. But because, especially as we move north, people consider dandelion a scourge, as like, oh, I got dandelion in my lawn, that they are poisoning it regularly. And you got to be careful. Even our parks down here, from the city, county, and it would not surprise me if the national parks as well are using Roundup to spray around trees, to spray their paths. And here, even places like Boyd Hill, which I love to think about wild harvesting, you can tell there's literally, they drive by with a truck, I've seen them do it, and they're just randomly spraying on the edges of the forest. So going in places that can't be reached by a car, looking for signs, asking your rangers if they spray and what they spray with, trying to find areas that they don't spray. I will say, I've been really lucky. Our parks department here and our city parks workers have set aside area at our request as no mow areas and no spray areas. So it is super appropriate to, like, rather than like cussing them out and doing all that, is taking the time to educate folks, so that we can ideally eliminate, but at least minimize the amount of really toxic, always present things like Roundup, which is the most common thing for them to use in the Parks Department, despite the lawsuits and the millions of dollars that have been spent, the proven carcinogenic properties of that. It's the convenient, and they probably got hundreds of gallons of it. They don't want to waste their money. So definitely some education is important. I wouldn't, I hate to say it, I always see them doing it without protective gear, without masks. Like, they should have a breathing thing, they should have gloves on, ideally a spacesuit on. And so going to the supervisors and trying to educate them, and the heads of departments, and trying to educate them go a long way. But asking around, yay, Facebook, ask who's got a couple of acres where they've left it abandoned for a couple of years. That's always, abandoned fields and things like that are a great place to source many herbs, dandelion being one of them. Non-alcoholic fatty liver. So when fat in itself isn't evil. There are lots of people in traditional cultures who are living, into their late 80s, 90s, and beyond, who, by our medical standards, we would say are morbidly obese. If we look at some of the people in a variety of countries in South America, as they go into menopause, especially some of the native people, they're like short and stout and very round. But what they found out, they don't have heart disease. They're not dealing with diabetes. And so it's about where the fat is. And so when we look at, like, I've got a little bit on my butt and my thighs, things like that, nobody cares. It's actually not harmful. It's protective against certain things. It's when we see what they call visceral fat, where we get the fat on the organs, and in particular on the liver, because it clogs up the works and makes it not do a good job, becomes inflamed. And so we classically think, if you have an inflamed liver, moving towards cirrhosis, therefore you must be a drinker or exposed to toxic chemicals. But the reality is, you can even appear to be thin and have visceral fat, where it's adhered to the organs. Unfortunately, it's all the yummy things, the refined sugars, that borderline diabetes. It oftentimes accumulates, and obviously true diabetes as well, but the insulin resistance, we start to see that. So it's exercise, maintaining healthy blood sugars is more important than maintaining healthy weight. I would argue that stress has a role in where we deposit our fats. So cortisol levels, which are cleared through sleep, so ensuring you get a good night's sleep. Avoiding the inflammatory fats, i.e. fried food, my running joke is like, how do I know whether there's the triglycerides, and the new math of 0 triglycerides can be written on a label, but it's really 0.5. It's the new math. Anything that you leave on the counter and it doesn't mold within a few days probably has trans fats and not good for you. It certainly has no nutrition to it, because mold needs something to grow on. And so knowing that if your crackers go bad because you left them out overnight and they're gross and you throw them out, those are probably good for you, hopefully. If your chips or your crackers are there for 5 days and they're still crunchy and yummy, they're not good for you. So it's one of those things, working on reducing inflammation by maintaining healthy blood sugars, eating healthy fats, but not the fried, yummy stuff. And I would argue making sure you get a good night's sleep where you're waking up feeling rested. If you're not waking up feeling rested, or you snore, you should actually get a sleep study done, because it's through sound, deep sleep that our cortisol processes in our body. That literally tends to accumulate fat in our abdomen. and it increases your risk greatly of heart disease. And so one of those frequently undiagnosed issues is sleep apnea. So it's one thing to have insomnia. It's another thing to nope, I go to sleep, I wake up, and I need 12 cups of coffee in order to start my day. Spotted bee balm. I love spotted bee balm. We just planted a bunch more here at the school. I had not seen it out on Weeden Island. I haven't been out to Weeden in ages. I'm going to have to go out there. Mandara, however you say that. So phenomenal herb. We can use it in a lot of the same ways that we use mints as an aromatic plant. It is a digestive, so for any kind of bloating gas. In higher doses, we can use it as a diaphoretic to make us break a sweat for colds and flu, in particular where you feel chilled more than you feel fever. It doesn't mean you don't have a fever, but if you're sitting there going, "Oh, I'm sick, I need a blanket," and you're occasionally taking it off, that's more of a cold type of cold, as opposed to, "Oh my God, I'm burning up, I want to take off all my clothes, don't put a blanket on me, I'll kill you." Then we need some cooling diaphoretics, and so we can certainly combine them together. Also, the spotted bee balm is phenomenal and can be used in Olympia. It's so funny, I find in the last few months I've spent more time talking about the spiritual bathing and the beating people with plants and things like that. The Olympia is the name for it in Mexico, Central South America. Limpiar, to bathe in Spanish, is that idea of literally beating people with plants to get spiritual things off of them that don't belong, things that are adhered to people, things the spiritual, emotional things that people carry with them. So aromatic plants in general, the smellier the plant, the more powerful it is, for lack of a better name to say it. And, so that one's phenomenally good. It's one that I've worked with some. It's particularly handy just because in some places it's literally a weed, so it's so helpful. I love the smell of it, oddly. Not everybody likes the smell. The taste of it is not sweet like some of the mints are. So it is definitely a stronger flavor. I happen to like it. Oh, and it's mildly diuretic and can be used for, actually with lemongrass, fever grass, can be used for kind of that chronic UTI or acute UTIs. You can use it as well. Yeah, see, you're one of the folks who likes the smell of it too. So value. And it's funny, I used to spend a lot of time out at Weeden Island. Since they prettied it up, I don't go out there as much, even though it's more access to more plants that are easier to source. I'm going to have to do an herb walk out up there one of these days and get some permission to do it. I don't know what they're doing as far as spraying and so forth out there. So it would be a really good question to ask the rangers out there. They do seem to try pretty hard to keep it natural out there. So yeah, I would agree. It's definitely, it's up there with oregano. And I like it. Oregano is a good antimicrobial. I would say any aromatic plant is. I like the spotted horse mint better for diaphoretic, so that breaking a sweat. All right, Panarnova, ascites, cirrhosis, we said that. So it's great. We always get dog questions. So here's my doggy book. Oh. So there are so many good references out there, and one of these days I'm going to be smart enough to write down the woman's name. There's a woman, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember. I know it when I hear it, but I'm like, she's got a Facebook group. I think she's super sharp. Only deals with critters, dogs. I'm not sure if she works with cats at all, but really doing her homework, really knowledgeable, and she has a Facebook group that she's really active in. Has a lot of files on how to do your own dog food and things like that to ensure that the dog's getting all of its nutrients, even talking about how to make modifications based on kidney disease and diabetes, some very common problems for dogs and cats. But I will say my favorite book, oops, I already got to get it on there, 4 Paws, 5 Directions, cutest book ever. And you don't need to know Chinese medicine in order to understand it. Oops. And it's even got, let's find a good one. There we go. So it's even got cool doggy acupuncture things there. Yes, thank you. And if I don't remember, yell at me if I don't do it within a couple days. But it has a really nice description of Chinese medicine, but it also does Western herbal medicine stuff on here. You can find a link on Amazon on our the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, traditionsherbschool.com. There's a link to that, so I can make $1 if you buy it from me. Selfless promotions. I get a whole check for $20 every 2 months. That book also talks about supplements. It looks at Western medical stuff, and it makes recommendations of classical Chinese formulas and acupressure points. I find acupressure extremely effective for dogs and cats and other critters as well, that you don't have to go to an acupuncturist. I mean, certainly for more serious problems. But the problem that she was having with her dog is and it's funny, it sounded like her vet had basically listed off from the most common to the most obscure every single problem this dog's problem could be, to the point where it's like, for somebody who had a little anxiety, it would be traumatizing. And correct me if I'm wrong, the dog had occasional bloating, noisy stomach, occasional vomiting if it was eating grass, and licking its paws a lot, but not so bad that it was like bleeding or cracking or anything like that. And so the vet was like, it could be nervous, it could be allergic to grass, it could be cancer, pancreatitis. I was like, oh my God. It's like, why don't we start with, let's see if it's nervous habit or something. So it's really important, dogs and cats have emotions, as do all critters. And they are pack animals, I would say the dogs especially. And there is separation anxiety, and I know in this puppy's case, it had a puppy companion, but usually the humans are a part of that pack, and frequently the pack leaders. And there is licking their lips or licking themselves can be a nervous habit. And that can go to the extreme where it's actually getting hot spots and injuries to just at certain times. And so in this particular puppy, it was, yes, thank you. Chime in because I'm not going to read the whole thing. I read it already. It was very intermittent. And so it could be like, no, you got food, you got water, there's somebody here playing you, but whoever its pack leader is, and it may be different pack leader for the different dogs, is that person stressed, or that person's preparing to leave? They haven't even left yet. They're going through their morning routine that maybe, or a change in routine. All of those can cause that anxiety and nervous behavior, and that may be that dog's. The other thing, it seemed like you, in the email you sent, you mentioned that it was more common when it was raining out, that if you took the dog out for a walk or was out running in the yard and there was rain, that's when it seemed to lick its paws a little bit more. And certainly a dog gets rained on, they get in the house, they shake and make everybody smell like wet dog. But they'll frequently lick themselves clean after rain. But that would be like they would lick their legs, they would lick their belly, not just their paws. And the fact that it was focused on their paws, I have to wonder if you're downhill from somebody, like you said, no, I haven't sprayed my yard, they're not in an HOA anymore, but it was a similar problem when you were in an HOA, where they did, of course, spray they spray poison everywhere and make you spray poison everywhere. So we see this problem occasionally showing back up around a time of rain. If you're downhill from somebody who is spraying, that may be showing up on the paws and still having a reaction to some sort of chemical exposure. It's one of those scary things. They were like, they say don't ever drink from a stream, unless you see where it's coming out of the ground, because there might literally be a dead animal or an animal pooping right around the bend of that river, and it's coming downstream. So we can be downhill from a source of some sort of sensitivity. There's things that we can do. It's always a challenge, and you said you'd put some salves and so forth on the puppy, and as long as it's not a hot spot, there's nothing wrong with licking. Salves, ensuring that they are non-toxic, as everybody always says, like, oh, we're going to put this salve, and I was like, yeah, you don't want to put comfrey, the dog's going to eat the comfrey. So dogs, if they can reach it, they're going to lick it, and nobody wants the cone of shame that put on a dog for a chronic problem. You can make a infusion or a decoction and put it by if there's a doggy door or something like that, and that they step through it, or you can dip their paws in it, is an option. The other thing, and I think you mentioned that it seems to happen more in the springtime, and then I'm assuming on into the summer, to make sure that if you're taking them for a walk, we always forget that those are little tender puppy paws, just like, so if we're challenged by walking on hot pavement or hot sidewalk, so are they. And so if they were out for a nice long walk and you got shoes on and they don't, that can actually be hard on their feet. And so it looks silly, but there's little doggy shoes that you can put on them. They usually hate them. So I would argue that any of those are a possibility. And I'm going to say, one of the things we always check for when we see dogs licking or hot spots and things like that, and I know in her case the food's probably great, but smelling their ears and smelling their paws. If they smell like Fritos or corn chips, they having digestive issues. They're you'll be seeing that there's too many starches, probably unrefined starches or just poor quality food, and it's causing some sort of yeast or fungal infection in the puppy. So that's a quick way to check for it. We'll oftentimes see like chewing their butt and their tail, things like that, when, boy, you give one sniff to those ears and you know what they got going on. I will add to that, possibility, always good to add a probiotic, and very simple to throw that into their food. You don't have to stuff the pill down their pie hole. Can be helpful if it's just a seasonal allergy, something in bloom. You can add stinging nettles to their food and burdock, grinding it up and just mixing it in with their food, or putting it into their water bowl. Either one of those is fine. And also massaging LI11, large intestine 11, and on dogs, it's going to be on their foreleg. Oops, there we go. And so on us, when we fold our arm, where the crease is, there we go. I got to get that on the camera. Where the crease is when I fold my arm, right at the end of that is large intestine 11, and so in a puppy's forelegs, you can massage that point. And it's specific for hot skin disorders. It will actually provide some comfort for them and reduce some of that. That's the biggie. So for the oh, hey Tabitha. Oh yes, I was trying to remember the name of that because when I saw this. So thank you for mentioning the Forever Dog. That's a different person that I was talking about. But so Tabitha's one of our graduates and students. We can't get rid of her. And now we're going to have the second generation of Tabitha coming, who's already taking the programs. So super exciting. And I'm sorry, I'm reading as I'm talking here. So kind of what I was saying is doing the foot soaks. So. And the fact that it's occasional makes it all the more interesting. I'm going to make sure I didn't miss anything. It's one of those things where it's always important to remember when we're dealing. It's funny, whether you're dealing with chickens or dogs, cats, and goats, you name it, there is always a pecking order for birds or a pack when we're talking the four-legged animals, and our role in that. It's one of the things that we don't understand our role in that too often, and recognizing that if there's confusion in the pack, that actually causes anxiety. The dog wants you to take over and be the pack leader, and that doesn't mean you yell at them. That just means you take a leadership role, that you give direction. And so ensuring that, if you're sitting there trying to, you don't understand why your dog doesn't listen to you or is misbehaved, it's usually the human's fault. The dog doesn't need to be told. The dog is trying to be the pack leader, but when we have multi-species, dogs are lousy pack leaders. So we're a little fancier as the pack leader. We just have to be comfortable adapting that role, and that can have a tremendous difference. So burdock, nettles, Li11. And we didn't mention digestive. And somebody mentioned curing pills. There's a couple of versions of that. There's curing pills. There's Ho Chai pills, and I'm sorry, I'm typing this into the chat, and Kan Ling Wan are all Chinese formulas that are used for just upset tummies. We can use any of our carminatives that we use in Western herbal medicine in the same way when there's a noisy stomach, bloating, gas. And, not that you want to sniff your dog's butt, although they would probably love that. If there's really smelly farts kind of thing, then we want some cooling carminatives. If you're like, I don't know, dog farts always smell bad, but nothing special, it's okay to use any blend of your carminatives. I always think chamomile, fennel, fenugreek's super appropriate for dogs. It's a little moistening, so you have to be careful of that. But any of our usual coriander is super appropriate for noisy stomach. And I would say I would look at what the dog ate in the 24 hours prior to that. It's probably sooner than that, but I would check the 24 hours. There was a dog treat or some table foods that maybe didn't agree with them. Remembering that there are some foods that puppies shouldn't have. Anything in the allicin family, so those are your onions and garlics. Grapes are particularly bad. Cacao and chocolate is bad for dogs. And, there's always a possibility. We'd like to think that animals are smarter than us when it comes to nature and what plants they can eat. Not always, so they might be getting into something that they shouldn't be. Either a dead animal or eating somebody else's poop, a plant that they shouldn't eat that maybe they snacked on. All of those are possibilities, so keeping an eye on our puppy dogs to make sure they're not doing something gross is always a good tell. Good that is not there all the time, it's occasional. Are they safe for cats? I would have to double check. I believe they are. Wouldn't be something that you'd want to use all the time. Obviously, it's nice. The dogs are pretty easy. You can throw it in their food bowl. You can throw it in their water dish. They're like, whatever. Cats are quite sure you're trying to kill them every second of every day, and they're kind of trying to kill you too. So with cats, sometimes a pill is easier. Obviously, adjusting for critter size is important when you're using any kind of formula or herbs. And in the case of dogs, think of them as humans. So if they're, a huge dog, 120 pounds, they're a human. You can give them human dosages. As we go smaller, we should be reducing our dosage. And a little chamomile in the water bowl, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. They'll probably lap it up. And remember, chamomile, it's funny, my brother just had major back surgery and just got out of the hospital today and has some stomach pain and bloating. I'm sure he has gas because I'm sure they gave him some opiate drugs to help with the severe pain. And it was like, they were looking for, his wife had texted me, is like, I'm sure you got some cool Chinese thing. And I was like, you got some chamomile or some fennel in the house because both of those are analgesic, they're pain killing, antispasmodic, and they're anti-gas. And so with chamomile, if you just take a single tea bag and you go dip, dip, dip in a little cup of water for 3 to 4 minutes, then it's sweet and flowery and yummy, and it's a great way to end your meal and get ready for bed. But that's not medicinal. So when we look at this, and I think what I said was take 4 tea bags, pour boiling water on them and steep them for a minimum of 30 minutes, but longer is better, and tell them to shut up and drink it. And if fennel, he could either do this kind of the same thing with tea, except with fennel, I was like a rounded teaspoon of fennel in hot water, steep 30 minutes, or even better, just chew that crap up and wash it down. So if we're doing something with dogs, I would say we have to be careful that, well, not be careful, but to make sure we're making it strong enough to have that carminative effect on their belly. Zucchini. Well, now that's a weird one. Okay, so Gianna's making a hilarious joke. If you've never seen the cat memes for, I forget what it's called, but the cucumbers attacking the cats, it is freaking hilarious. It's so inappropriate and so very funny. So I think that's a special cat that's traumatized by those, but maybe once you've butchered the cucumbers and zucchinis, the cat seeks its revenge against the monster. Oh my God, that's so funny. So, and really explore, like, you have to figure out, like, it's how do you get into the mind of a dog to see if it's anxiety, and really exploring and trying to understand the pack order, your role in it, and how your behaviors may be affecting that pack order, because that can also cause digestive issues. In which case, if it is, you might also look at flower essences for the puppy, and for that matter, for the cat. My very first dog, it's amazing that I ever had any other dogs. I've been a dog lover for as long as I've been alive, I think. And when I was in elementary school, I was in New York City, Manhattan proper, and our building literally without crossing the street. So I was allowed to. If I was raised today, my mother would probably be in jail for all the things that were normal back in the 60s. So I could walk to the park on my own, and we had a dog park, and I never had to cross any streets. And so I would literally go out there, and I got to know all the dog owners and played with all their dogs, and there's so many amazing dogs. And at some point, some stray had wandered in, and this group of dog owners, who were all friends, took the dog in, took it to the vet, got it cleaned up, and then looked for somebody to adopt it. And so they suckered me into getting it, and so the dog was found on Thanksgiving Day, so the dog's name was Turkey, and this dog was a turkey, and so he had a lot of separation anxiety. And so an apartment in New York City, big heavy metal door, carpet, and so if we left for 5 minutes, 15 minutes a day, didn't matter, it would take a dump right in front of the door, so that when we came home and opened the door, you can imagine, amazingly we kept the dog. But that was a digestive anxiety behavior that it was exhibiting and torturing us. I had another dog years later that knew how much I loved gardening and working with my herbs, and if I left overnight, if I stayed away and like went off to American Herbalist Guild conference or something, it would wait till I came back, and then it would spite me when I left it out in the yard. He would go and dig up my favorite plant, and literally just dig a big old hole. Never dug holes except for when I came back from an overnight trip. So literally, dogs are very expressive of our pack order, and they can show it as anxiety, digestive issues, nervous habits. Think about it. We chew our nails if we're nervous. A dog licks its feet, as does a cat sometimes. Panting is another sign of that as well. So really starting to psychoanalyze your dog and looking at your role in all of it can be entertaining, to say the least. What am I doing at time? All right, so we're halfway through, so I got to give myself this plug. If you don't know it, Tradition School of Herbal Studies, traditionsherbschool.com. The clinical practice is acuherbals.com. We have 4 acupuncture physicians, 2 herbalists, and a spiritual worker, and a partridge in a pear tree. Our newest acupuncturist, Martina, is going to be teaching a class on the effects of diet and mental health this coming Wednesday, August 31st from 6 to 8 p.m. here at the school, 6340. And on Thursday, next week Thursday, September 1st, I can't believe it's already September, from 6 to 8, Gray Dean will be teaching Intro to Ayurvedic and Doshas. That's a free class as well. It's great to get in there to take that class, although you're not required to take that to go and do all the other ones. You'll have a better foundation in all of the information if you jump into that freebie. Remember, you can get it online. It'll be recorded, and so we do ask that you register those so that we make sure we don't have 1 million people show up in standing room only. Yeah, it'll be on Zoom, so yeah, you don't have to drive all the way up here, Tabitha. Tabitha is like 3 hours away. Poor woman drives up here all the time for classes and other good stuff. Oh, you're driving up here this weekend. And if we've got lots of other, we've got anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, medicine making circle, and the Ayurvedic herb circle. The Western and the Chinese programs are starting soon. I know you can't read that, but you can find it on the website. And don't forget, we've got a YouTube page. All right, let's go on. We got more stuff. And I don't think anybody's posted any other questions. If I did, I missed it, so feel free to post it again. Oh, there was an interesting comment somebody just posted on the YouTube page, and I was doing a video on saw palmetto, I think, recently. Or not that recently. It's probably been a year. And they were like, let me see if I saw palmetto. Do you also harvest the leaves and the stems? And so let me talk about saw palmetto for a moment. Saw palmetto is a wonderful herb. It's unique to the southeast. A lot of it in Florida. And it's been heavily over-harvested to the point where the state felt obligated to institute some very strong restrictions where you have to get a permit to harvest saw palmetto. So even if you have private land where somebody goes, oh yeah, I got 20 acres, go harvest all you want, you actually are supposed to get a permit. You're on your own figuring out the criteria for it, because I never wild harvest that. This is around the time of year, so the next, probably from like end of July through October, depending on where you are, is starting to harvest. We're harvesting the berries on the saw palmetto, and I always pick them just as they're going from green to yellow with maybe some brown spots on them. I consider that ideal. I don't like them to go past that. They're actually too nasty even for me to eat. And the other part, it's palmetto. The saw palmetto is one of the many palmettos that can be used, but saw palmetto is unique. It's named after the saw-like teeth that, like, if you grab the stem of the leaf on there and pull, it will literally shred your hand. And I learned that the hard way. So it's named after that. And there's some other interesting characteristics to identify it uniquely different from our other types of palmettos that grow. If you look at the stem attachment on the leaf, it's a blunted tip, where some of our other palms have a sharper tip, a pointed tip on the stem attachment to the leaf. There is a inner part, the heart of palm that people eat, is edible and can be harvested from any of the scrub palms, the sago palm, and saw palmetto. All will have an edible heart to them. But it doesn't have the same exact properties that we see in the saw palmetto berries. Although they are very nourishing, super yummy, fresh, pickled, or roasted, or steamed, all phenomenal. It's not going to have the same role of and it's funny, there's different ways to think of the saw palmetto berries. If we look at the medical properties of the berries themselves, they help with the processing of DHT, the dihydrotestosterone. So when we look at, we've got free testosterone and then we've got used up testosterone. And it's very effective for the elevated DHT, which is easier to say than the other words. So when we see BPH, the benign prostate hyperplasia, the enlarged prostate for men, the easy way to talk about that is if a guy is getting dribbles, and that can happen at any age, but certainly as we kind of get over the age of 40, it's more common. If our diet's not as good, more sedentary lifestyle, our prostate sometimes will get a little clogged up. And so the saw palmetto is helpful in the conversion and elimination of the DHT. We also will use that for women, especially in the case of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because we, in many cases, will see an elevated testosterone, and that will be used and switch into DHT. And so we see some of the hair thinning that comes with PCOS and some of the other issues. And so saw palmetto is a really good addition from a more medical herbalist standpoint for that. You'll also find quality control makes a difference with any herb. Saw palmetto is unique. So if you're like man or woman and you're taking it, you're like, well, it doesn't seem to do anything, you may have a crappy product. Open up your capsule, taste your tincture, whatever. But usually it's in a capsule. You open it up, take a taste. It's using organoleptic testing, i.e. smells like, tastes like, looks like, then it must be. This is a valid method of evaluating the quality of plant medicine. Not that I've ever seen or tasted moldy, rancid soap, but that's what it tastes like. And so you're going to have to use your imagination, or grab a saw palmetto berry and nosh on it. It's disgusting. It causes some people to puke when you have the fresh berries. I understand for the native people here in Florida, it was one of their favorite things to give to the Europeans as they came in because they couldn't hang. So it was almost a joke that here's this, what they would describe as an aphrodisiac herb, and it can have that role, but made into a strong decoction and let to sit and slightly ferment. It was very hard to stomach unless you were used to it. It will cause loose stools for some folks. And so from, I would say, Western and Chinese energetics, we would say it's nourishing and warming. And so in Chinese, we would say it warms the yang. And most things that are warming are drying, but this one's moistening. So if you had constipation and tended towards cold, constipation isn't a requirement to be there, but one of the side effects that we oftentimes see with it is that it causes bloating, hard on the stomach, or diarrhea. So watching for that, or adding carminative herbs to it to make it easier to digest. It is oily in its nature, and we see that in all seeds, and this is the berry that has the seed in it of saw palmetto, so therefore it's oily in its nature. And if it goes too far, it becomes rancid and really hard on the belly. So the long and the short of all of that is we tend not to use the leaves and the stem. They are better for thatch or weaving. And so all parts of the plant can be used. The fibers can be pulled off of it as fire starter. There's almost like a netting. On other palms, the netting actually is a stop bleed, that it can be charred and drank to stop bleeding internally. The edible inner heart wood of it can be used. What else have I used that? Oh, the stems, especially on the saw palmetto, make great marshmallow sticks because they can get pretty long and they've got the little barbs on there. So barbs can be good or bad depending on your point of view. On the larger, not on the saw palmetto, on some of the larger palms, you can actually make a spear. There's a cool name for it, but three-pronged spear that's good for fish, crayfish, or turtles for hunting. And I say that because I've had, I think I actually set a date to start the class. I've had a lot of people asking me to do some survivalist classes, and I'm like, that used to be my jam, and that's probably was more of my inroads to the herbalism than anything. So I didn't know the word prepper back in the day, but that's now the name for the crazy people who are living off grid and learning to all of those zombie apocalypse kind of things. And so I started studying that probably about the same time I started to learn herbalism, because I was looking at wild foraging kind of things. And I think we got first aid next year on this. Tricia is quite the taskmaster and keeping my nose to the grindstone. So she literally has class dates and topics for the next all of 2023 and most of my conferences. So it's pretty cool. Hey, Jeremiah's. One of the things that, besides, like, I was teaching wilderness first aid in the Boy Scouts when I had a Boy Scout troop in Germany, I spent 3 years living on a sailboat and 6 months of it living on the Everglades off the land, and doing everything from solar stills to snares to blowguns and all kinds of interesting ways to catch dinner, as well as all of the plant medicine and plant food and seaweeds, as well as fire starting and so forth without a match, which is a pain. Zombie apocalypse, I'm stealing all the lighters and all the matches, because I would prefer that to having to do it by hand. It's not hard, but it's hard. There's definitely a learning curve to that. Sorry, and I saw a question there. Do you salt palmetto regularly with clients for prostate issues? Yes, it is probably the chief herb for most BPH, so dealing with the benign prostate hyperplasia and large prostate, but not things like prostate cancer or prostatitis, where there's an infection. I would say it can be used as a single, but it tends to be in formula, and especially because I find it moistening, the seed aspect of it. If there is a tendency to lose stools, we need to add other herbs that have some of that drying action to it, and that's kind of that art of formulation that people come to school for. But there's things that can be added in there, like the stinging nettle root is very specific for it, and is more drying in its nature. Where a poema, I'm saying it wrong, is I forget whether it's African or South American, is used and more dry. But we can also look at things that are just good for phlegm. So we've got things like our local plant Smilax, the tufuling of Chinese herbal medicine, is specific for congestion, phlegminess, swelling in the lower body. And so we always talk about it for urinary tract infections, and yeast infections, but it's also good for enlarged prostate. And the sarsaparilla in Jamaican medicine, Caribbean medicine, so Smilax, and I'm going to say spa, it doesn't matter what species, they all have very similar functions, is good for both acute and chronic inflammatory skin disorders, but also specific for things below the belly button that are wet and swollen. The other one is the daughter seed, and I would say vine, and that's the love vine in Chinese, in Western herbal medicine, or tusizi in Chinese herbal medicine. And so that can be added into the formula as well, and has an effect on hormones. There's tons of other stuff that can be used, but those are the biggies. I'll sometimes use, I forgot about that, black cohosh as well, is a very drying herb and good for the lower body as well. What other ones do we want to talk about? Oh, I got an interesting email. I get the strangest emails sometimes. So I got an email from an herbalist linguist. And in a way, I was like, I was checking my email right before I jumped on here, and I was like, what do I do with this? And I was like, this is relevant because this does cause some problems. And he was asking specific pronunciation about how I teach my students the right way to say algae, wart, fungi, and plantago. And it's fascinating because he was a linguist, and there was I saw he had written a book on linguistics and pronunciation. I don't know that this guy was from England or not. And then he wanted to know whether I was from Canada, the U.S., or England. And Canada's mostly English speaking, unless you're the Quebecers that will stab you unless you speak French. I don't think it matters. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. Because those are regional dialects of pronunciation. And I always joke that when we look at, even if we say we speak the English language, I speak an American dialect, and within the U.S., we also have uniquely dialectic differences based on the region you come from. And so born in Chicago, raised in New York, and then the Bahamas. So I throw in some English pronunciation and spelling to really screw people up when I start adding extra vowels into certain things. I was like, oh, sorry. So I don't think linguistics is bad, but when it comes to herbalism, we see unique pronunciations. We see language. We see common names oftentimes confuse us, because I just mentioned the smilax. And so in the islands we call it sarsaparilla, but in some places sarsaparilla is sassafras, and there's another tree that's called sarsaparilla that I don't even remember what it is. And so we have a common name, three completely different plants, three completely different uses. I get an email because I have some videos about kratom, and so I learned at first to call it kratom. Other people say no, it's kratom, and I'm like, I went and checked the leading guy from the University of Florida, and he commented it's kratom, it's kratom, it's kratom, and completely different words that I don't even know how to say, depending on what island you came from, what country. And so I go to all of that. That's my educated opinion about it. Pelvic, lymphatic, actillo, be good to mix in with. It's funny that is a unique plant that I have not worked that much with. But if I remember right, it would be super appropriate to add into it. There are a number of herbs that when we look at them, we think of them as women's herbs, but those can be used when we look at they're more below the belly button. And I say that intentionally because that it starts to be more pelvic oriented, pelvic inflammatory, pelvic astringents. And so there isn't a good way to say that, because sometimes it's very specific to a tissue or a hormone, or we look at an energetics, and sometimes they're more generalized as in an area. And if we recognize its energetic action in there, they can be a good addition into things like that. So the classics are the nettle root, but every regional one, I think I use the smilax more than most. Doesn't show up, and it's funny. Jeremias was there. He came to the acupuncture conference, the Fasoma conference, and ended up sitting in mostly my classes. But that's fine. You can hear me every day of the week. Go to the other ones. But that the dominant medicine in European medicine, the dominant medicine in China, in India, and so forth, was usually the north. And so where we had a lot of the capitals, the government focus was in the Northeast. We see Northern Europe was kind of the apex. And so those are the dominant cultures. So the herbs of those areas, and the same is true in Northern China. Our books are written primarily about Northern China, not Southern China. Our classical formulas we learn in Chinese medicine are primarily Northern Chinese, not Southern Chinese, even though there's a whole tradition down there. But especially in Chinese medicine, we have the two main languages of China are separated by North and South. And so when we look at something like smilax, although it does grow some in the north, it's more prolific and more commonly used here in the south than it is in the north. And so we find in the Caribbean, they use the heck out of smilax. Up north, you don't find a lot of reference. You don't find it being added into any classic formulas from the eclectics or anything like that. It's one of the things that I'm trying to do a better job. I'm incorporating more and more of our bioregional plants here because they're not talked about enough, that we're not learning about the Caribbean plants, the Florida specific, especially the central and southern Florida and the Keys. We're not learning about this herbal medicine, and it's quickly being lost as the internet starts to take charge of our herbal medicine and TikTok. We're losing a lot of the cultural context of those things, and if we're not practicing with the medicine we can pull out of our backyard, then nobody's going to remember it, and so I'm going to do my very best to continue to pull in our bioregional plants into even the Chinese medicine, because things like poke are in Chinese medicine, our beautyberry is in Chinese medicine, the smilax is in Chinese medicine, the love vine is in Chinese medicine. Sweet gum trees are in there. So there's like the list is endless. I joke all the time that everybody forgets. I bet you a quarter of the herbs that are in the Chinese medica actually grow in Florida, and are native here. And so we see that there are weeds that grow throughout the tropic and subtropical regions. And even though northern China is dominant, these are ones that have expanded into all of that. So trying to make that a little more approachable and to make sure that people make those connections when they feel disconnected from the Chinese medicine in particular. But because the Chinese preserved their culture, they kept the Europeans out better than anywhere else in the world. If you remember your history books, there was 3 ports on the Yangtze River that the European traders were allowed on, and it wasn't until the late 1800s with the Opium Wars that they tried to make better inroads into all of that. But even then, the Europeans never took over the way they did in India. And so I love me some Ayurvedic medicine. The reality is the English screwed it all up. That they had too much influence, burned the books because they thought it was evil. We look at the Caribbean culture, we lost so much of it because before the African slaves came over, were brought over to the United States and to the Caribbean, they killed all of the indigenous people. Not all of them, some survived, but many of those indigenous people, the Lucayans, the Caribs, the Arawaks, and all the Taino people, all of those Caribbean were the first slaves because they were present, and as they massacred, literally it's estimated that close to 100 million people were killed in the first years of colonization, the first 50 to 100 years, that then we saw they needed a new source and brought in the African slaves. And they brought their culture in, learned from some of the indigenous people here, and so we saw a blending of those two cultures. And so in the same way, there's a really long way around in these cultures. The Chinese, because their culture was preserved, we can find some of the same plants, genus, and species that we can relearn how to use this. And then once we understand a little bit about the energetics, we can then start to have our own experiences through that lens of other traditional cultures and energetic systems that we can understand it better. It's funny. I know it is a Southwest, and it's always interesting the influence. Like I want to see where all of my graduates and students are 50 years from now. When I'm worm dirt. Michael Moore, the herbalist, not the movie guy. Michael Moore was probably had one of the very first schools, and he passed away. Was it 96? I don't remember. He passed away a while back. Um, he had one of the first herb schools in the country, the formal clinical energetics, using the teachings of the eclectics and a few of the others. But his school was, I believe, in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. And he specialized in the southwestern herbs. And so, although his was diagnostics and energetics, some of which he came through the lens of Chinese medicine, I believe, and I don't know why he knew that at all. But he talked particularly about that. So many of the people who have herb schools and are herbalist practitioners came through his program. Michael Tier, I think Michael Tier took his program. David Winston, Seven Song, Lorna. So many of these folks were his students and carried on his traditions. And so usually we wouldn't know the obscure herbs of that area, that northern Mexico, southwest United States. It's through his teachings that those became mainstream in our culture. And if you're curious, I frequently say, like, search Michael Moore herbalist, and his website will come up. It's the Southwest School of Botanical Medicine. His website is, yes, hey, John, what up? So his website is still maintained by his graduates. And there are many of the old Thompsonians and the eclectics, a lot of the text, I think going back all the way to the 1500s, are archived there, that you don't need a password or anything. Those are open domain, but it's a wonderful place to use for the Western herbalist as a starting place into all the information. A lot of his information is archived on that website, specifically about some of those Southwest U.S. plants. So I understand he cussed more than I do and was an even bigger ass than I am. So I understand his classes were interesting, to say the least. Sorry, checking my time there. Yes, yeah, it's all free. They did have things where you could say, like, ooh, I want to buy his recordings. Those links may work, but I've emailed them to try to buy his recordings. I actually did, in a roundabout way, I actually purchased a bunch of his recordings. But he doesn't have anything that's available for sale on there. But yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. There's a couple of really good resources like that. I love, he's frequently a starting place when I'm doing research. Jim McDonald is a wonderful resource. He has a slew of information. And actually, Richie, I don't know if I just assume you know Jim McDonald or have seen some of his stuff. Because you're from a Native American group up there, the Oneida, I'm not sure why he knows some of the information from the local. He's in Michigan, so nearby. But I believe he learned some stuff from the Ojibwa up there. And as far as I know, that's like his teaching about Mullen, his teaching about Solomon's seal. I believe he was taught by some of the native people there, and he's the only one who I know of who talks about those herbs and the unique uses. But he is a wonderful resource, a wonderful teacher that, unless you're moving down to Florida, that I would say also, whenever you have an opportunity, he's not that far away, that he's a great resource. The other one is, oh my God, Henrietta's Herbals. She is from Iceland, I think. And she is, I've known her name since the internet was new, when we had listservs and there was no Facebook and all the other interesting things. And I guess in Iceland you have nothing better to do in the wintertime. That she gathered I think she started by archiving she was on every listserv that I could find on herbal medicine back in the late 80s, as I'm guessing. That she was archiving everything that was written, at least from people who were known humans to have reasonable experience and training. And on her website, and she, if you happen to speak Icelandic, she has it in her language as well, but it's also in English, and basically has all of that information archived on a website. I believe it's all free. And so it's a little clunky to get around it, but wonderful, wonderful resource. I've never met her. I think I've corresponded with her occasionally over the years. But really just, she has kept all of our modern information from all of the people, many of which have passed on now. So, oh yeah, the asters are an interesting one. Most of your asters are used as medicine, whatever your local aster is. I'm sure there's some you should not use, but and some people do have, because it's an Asteraceae, the multi-flowered plants. Many people have sensitivities to those, so most of them are used as antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, both internally and externally. The different asters have different uses. But some people will have a sensitivity. They're not going to go into anaphylactic shock, hopefully, although I'm sure that is the potential for people who have very severe allergies. It's funny, and I've got a couple more questions, but I'll get to those. We got 30 minutes left, so there is an interesting thing, and Jeremiah, I think you got some of the information. I forget which classes you sat in, so I just got back from Orlando Sunday night, and I taught. There was the acupuncture, the Florida State Oriental Medicine Association, FSOMA, had their annual conference. They have it every August, and every other year they have a little bit more unique classes there. And so I ended up teaching 4 classes, most of them herbal oriented. And so it was really appropriate for students to herb students to show up there that had a foundation in Chinese medicine. I would argue even the Western herbal students, at least in the advanced class, would have actually understood most of what was there, because I was introducing the acupuncturists, and it was 99% acupuncturists there. I think Gray and Jeremiah's were the 2 holdouts that weren't acupuncturists, which is awesome. That most of the people there weren't familiar with Western herbs. They weren't familiar with bioregional herbs. So it was a lot of fun introducing them to some of the concepts of that. And in one of the classes, it was literally, and this is mean, I was kind of poking the bear a little bit and saying, look, herbalists are here to stay, and Chinese medicine is not the only medicine on the planet with a diagnostic system and a history. And so I decided at the start of the class, besides talking about my lineage through the Bahamas and so forth, that I would talk a little bit about the history of European herbal medicine that paralleled Chinese herbal medicine, or Chinese medicine as a whole. And and so I talked about in Salerno in 807 AD, one of the first medical schools was formed there, and you can find information on that. It's like you do medical school, Salerno, ancient, it'll come up. So in 807, this university was formed. It was considered the best medical school in the world, within the known world for Europeans, and included the systems of the Greek humors, Anani Tibbs, the Persian medicine, as well as some of the European medicine. And I would say the Greeks and the Persians were more advanced than the Northern Europeans at that time in their medicine at 800 AD. And most of the Northern Europeans were using the Greek system primarily. This med school literally had people from all over the European and Asian and African continent. They would send their best physicians there in order to share their local knowledge and to learn here from the leading institution. And because of its location there in Spain, it was easily accessible. It was equally far from all of these areas. And so we saw Ayurvedic influences in there, and we see that around 1000 AD, so it had been in operation for 200 years at this point, the Chinese sent delegates there, and we see it around 1000 AD, frankincense and myrrh from the Middle East made it into the Medica of Chinese medicine. And so it was knowledge that they brought back from Salerno. And really unique thing about it is that they allowed women to have equal footing and were just as able to go there and study medicine as men were. And so this was, too often women, after this university closed, women were marginalized. They were kept out of mainstream medicine, which was herbal medicine, in many of the traditions. And this one was really like, nope, if you're smart enough to study medicine, one of their professors there who taught gynecology was a famous woman doctor who, to her death, taught there, wrote the very first books in Western thought on gynecology that are, was used for the next 1,000 years almost. That those were the books. And unfortunately, as we saw the Crusades start to get fired up and the destruction of the Persian Empire, that also went by the wayside because at that time, much of Spain was under Persian control. And as the warring of the clash of concepts literally destroyed one of the great learning institutions that was proactive in equality and so many other things. So it's always interesting that there's a plethora of books on herbalism, dietary health, dermatology, blah, 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 surgical procedures, and all of this, and saw the equal footing in all the systems of medicine and all of the cultures, which I thought was pretty rocking. And somehow we screwed it all up again and again. Sorry, I'll climb off my soapbox for a moment. We talked about that. And we talked about that. All right, mugwort. Make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. So mugwort, and there are a ton of different mugworts. Artemisia, we say Artemisia vulgaris, and that's the herb of commerce. So many different regions have mugwort growing throughout the U.S., Europe, Japan, and China. All have their own species, and they're all used very similarly. Oops, I think I spelled it right. My odds are getting blurry. So the Japanese, in Chinese medicine, we use mugwort. It's called aye. We use the leaf internally, but there's also a technique, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, called moxa, where the dried mugwort is processed, rolled up, and either burnt on acupuncture points or rolled up into cigars and with indirect moxa, where we'll stimulate the acupuncture points of the body. And I'd say about 95% of all acupuncture points are specifically indicated for the use of mugwort. If we look at the original, the primary textbooks in China and in the U.S., they're called CAM, Chinese Acupuncture and Moxa, and it's always funny to me that the majority of acupuncturists don't do moxa because it smells funny and they're afraid to use it and so forth. I would say that the Japanese mugwort is considered the Yamoji is the superior mugwort according to the Chinese even, and that's saying a lot because the Japanese and the Chinese kind of hate each other for a variety of reasons, but they do consider that the finer of the stuff. It's a greater tradition, very specific of like it has to be harvested under the full moon, the sixth moon, blah 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 blah, before it goes into flower, all of this stuff. The reality is every mugwort, I've used the California mugwort. I found one in Colorado, was in Durango, and I didn't have time to dry it and process it, but I played with a little bit. I found a little dried. I'm quite sure it would have worked fine. The smell was right and everything. The all of them work fine. The California, I would say, is on par with most of the stuff I've used from China. I've used the stuff from the Northeast. I grow that regularly and process it happily, use that. And so mugwort internally is specific for cold menses, and so it's a warming herb with a specific function for menstruation. It will frequently bring on the menses, so it's an ememagogue, which basically means it starts your menses. So be careful working with it. If you're, I wouldn't call it an abortive, but I would not. I would use great caution around it if you're pregnant, especially first trimester. It is, but that said, it's used as a food in soups and spices, and I think there's like some kind of cool roll that they make out of it. So it is a question of dosage, without a doubt, with it. Some people smoke it. I always say smoking herbs is bad for you, but it's probably not as bad as tobacco. Hot burning things in your lung is never good for you, to include oak leaves, not your friend. It is used spiritually, both in Olympia, where I mentioned where you either ritual bathing with it or literally beating people, rubbing them down with the herbs. It is used by some traditional healers fresh, put under the pillow to enhance dreaming, under their head. They may not have had a pillow. There's visioning that comes with it, sometimes positive, sometimes not. So it's important that, sometimes when we ask for dreams and we use herbs in order to bring about dreaming, careful what you wish for. It's not always positive. Sometimes negative stuff can come in all of it. Doesn't make it bad. It's just not everybody's ready for it. And yes, moxibustion can be used on puppies, on dogs. I've used moxibustion on dogs. I know it being used on horses, and I've used it on a snake. And Sierra, one of the herbalists here, used it on a bearded dragon. So moxibustion's good for dragons, and to great success. I think she did it in a single treatment. She treated the bearded dragon for PTSD, and it had lost some toes as a baby. Somebody thought it was worms, and one of the other bearded dragons ate it off, and so it failed the bond with its litter mates the way the other ones did. It didn't warm to anybody. It would always run and hide. I guess we'd been talking about PTSD for some reason, and the acupressure points and the moxa points. And so she went home and rolled up a little joint of mugwort, and cold-blooded animals like heat sources. So just by warming it above the points, was able to stimulate it, and that became one of her favorite bearded dragons. It would now play with her, interacted with the other dragons to good success. So always interesting. What else can I say about it? Internally, externally, one of the interesting things, and it's one of those things we can't practice in the U.S. The direct moxa. There was 2 versions of direct moxa and there's subtleties beyond that. That There was scarring and non-scarring. So we could use thread moxa, which was generally non-scarring, but it was done on the skin. I've had it done to me. It hurts. The scarring moxa was primarily done on an acupuncture point on children who had seasonal allergies. And they would specifically scar, like blister and burn, a point on their upper back that after a single treatment would cure asthma and seasonal allergies. Here in the US, we'd lose our license and go to jail, but it's a thing in China, so anybody who's planning a trip to China and has asthma, might be able to hook you up there. You're just going to have some two funny marks on your back. Zombie apocalypse, I can totally do it. The moxa can also, the mugwort dried and processed is called moxa. I had some sitting here. But it's not limited to a single herb. We can formulate our moxa, and so other dried herbs can be added in there to make it go to a particular direction, to make it warmer, cooling, to modify it. And we can also use a barrier with it. So we can use a thinly sliced garlic or ginger, aconite. All of those can be done with the mugwort on top of it, and very classically done on salt. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But literally, your creativity is the only limit for it. I've used for venomous bites, in particular spider bites. I would use something called the golden yellow salve. I would usually mix some other herbs into there, like plantain, powdered plantain, put those over the spider bite, and then I would take the moxa and doing indirect moxa, warm it over that in order to deactivate the venom from spider bites. I've also used it for, I've mashed up herbs poultices and used that to drive the medicine in. And so, like, sometimes you can make stuff up and do whatever. So your Japanese mugwort you can use just like any other kind of mugwort. I love it for its spiritual practices. I love the dream enhancement of it. I happen to like most of the dreams because I don't normally remember my dreams. So definitely a winner. Survival classes online. Yeah, but it won't be the same. So, one of the... I always, hands-on classes are always the best, but you can't watch a video on starting a fire with a bow drill or a friction start or sparking. And I got to try to... I know where there's some stones that we can use as to start a fire, but they don't run trips on the Hillsborough River anymore, so I'm going to have to, before that class, I'm going to have to go out because it's the only place I know of locally where I can find the stones for creating fires. And there's a big old mound there, so it's a Native American midden mound there, trash mound. So it's all their discarded stuff for making points and so forth. So the trash mound, if I didn't say it. And we'll see how much. I haven't written the curriculum for it because really I wanted to do a whole series, but I don't know that my life will allow that. So I may do a series of standalone evening classes because there's skills like making rope or twine, weaving, knot tying, and generally, forget the zombie apocalypse, Robinson Crusoe thing. How do you make specific knots to do things like climb with, to secure posts? How do we make a log cabin? So I have to, obviously first aid is one of the more important parts, and some of that, boy, it's just so much better in person. So we'll probably do it online because, we are still in the zombie apocalypse. But I'm going to say, come in person, find a hotel or something. Reach out on Facebook and find a friend in St. Pete that you can crash on their couch or something. I'm sure some of the students would be happy to put you up if you shout out for it. So there should be like a whole thing of herbalist couch surfing, so that folks from up north can come down here in the winter time and take some classes and stuff. So I'm still figuring out the curriculum, and I may there's a local person here that I understand teaches a really good survivalist class that I'm hoping. He doesn't know this, that I'm going to try to sucker him into co-teaching, because I got to quiz him a little bit and find out where his skills are. If he's got some skills that I don't have, that we can co-teach a little bit and have some fun with it. So I will say it will be first aid heavy. There will be some native plant first aid stuff. So I'm going to encourage everybody, when we think about Florida in particular, and I know not everybody on here is from Florida. We got really nice, diverse crowd here tonight. I'm going to say that Florida as a whole, the chances of us needing like wilderness survival first aid skill kind of stuff is pretty high. Should a nasty hurricane come up here, like we had that Category 1 that hit, what was it, 5 years ago or something? I didn't have power at my house for at least 10 days. And so, although I had a Coleman stove, how do you cook food? How do we know it's safe? So some of it, how do I, when I think about Abaco, where I grew up, and they had that hurricane that parked on them. It was a Cat 5 hurricane that basically parked on top of the island for 3 days. And the entire island was basically underwater, under 20 feet of water, where if you didn't have a second story building, there's a really good chance that you drowned. And so that island is still, and with the multiple towns on there, is still in recovery phases, where the capital's squared away, some of the out islands are squared away, but there's still people living in tents. And so those folks already knew how to do wilderness survival. They knew what plants were edible. But we can't always count on, in a severe situation like that, we can't count on the government bringing us water and fuel and food and things like that. We may be a day or days from first aid care. And so, I don't know, Florida, we run a higher risk. So I always encourage everybody to do like a CPR first aid CPR class, to get the basics and renew those constantly. But those classes basically teach you how to stabilize somebody for a little while until the paramedics get there. So what do we do when we don't have paramedics that are a 911 call and an hour, 30 minutes to an hour away? How do we either transport an injured person to a area where we can be rescued, or how do we stabilize people as best we can and treat them with the herbs that we have here? And so, like, it's great that I have an apothecary with 1,000 herbs in there and pre-made formulas, but when I go camping, I don't carry all of those. So it's like what you got. And so it is about the plants that grow here. Yeah, I know, I get asked that question all the time. I don't have a good answer. Yun and Bayao, the Chinese thing, is a good stop bleed. Sometimes it's spelt Bayao, or some Payao is probably one of the biggest. But the reality is, like, it depends on, you have dogs in your house, you have a husband in your house, and I know his health concerns, and so if you had kids in your house, you would have a different thing. If you live alone, you'd have a different thing based on your likely problems, based on age, are going to be different. And then ultimately, no, we should all have a defibrillator in our house, or not. And so it's about knowing the plants. Literally, every time I move to a new neighborhood, I start walking concentric circles to see what's in the yards around me. And so, should a zombie apocalypse, should the hurricane, a serious hurricane, I want to know where I can walk in a short period of time to find the medicinal plants that grow there if I don't grow some of them myself. And so it is about knowing your bioregional plants that really is the most important thing. How do you, for us here, I rant about Spanish needle, Biden's alba, because it's a weed. It's everywhere. Panarnova, phenomenal weed. Sweet gum, a phenomenal weed. Elderberry, everywhere. And so knowing our plant medicine, amaranth for the Americas in general, so North, Central, and South America, that is such a medicinal plant. And so if you tend towards kidney stones, you better know Chunca and there's soldier's button, whose Latin name I always forget, is a stop bleed that's on par with shepherd's purse that grows here. And a Cherokee elder taught me that the wild mustard, the poor man's pepper, is used by the Cherokee in the same way. And I didn't believe him, and I was like, "You sure it's this plant?" And I did some research. I finally found it. So it really is. I think, I don't know whether I told the story on here before or not. I had a student who sent me an email. She was on vacation. She was doing something in in Costa Rica. Didn't speak Spanish. Was isolated, so she didn't have a way to get into the major cities, and she'd gotten, I don't know whether it was food poisoning or something that caused up one of her, flared up a chronic condition she had, and she was having some really heavy bleeding. And the guy sent me an email, and she's like, "What should I do? I don't speak the language. I don't have anybody here who can help me, and I'm not sure I can get out of here with the amount of heavy bleeding I'm having." And I was like, "What the hell am I supposed to do from 1,000 miles away?" And she didn't know South American plants, and so I was able to think about the herbs that were bioregionally available for her there. And oddly enough, burnt human hair is a wonderful stop bleed. And so she did that, and I think she found the poor man's pepper and maybe one other herb, and was able to get the bleeding under control enough that she could get back to the U.S. So always the right first aid kit is the one that's right for you, your likely conditions, the environment you're in, and it's great to carry stuff, but ultimately knowing your plants that are local. So, all right, I'm going to wrap it up. For any of you who came late or want to hear all of the gibberish that I said again, remember I'm going to upload this onto the YouTube channel for Tradition School of Herbal Studies. Watch them all, subscribe. One of these days I'm going to get back on the game and do more videos. I literally have got a list that my time will be freed up here soon enough, or I'm going to sit down and spend a day and do like a bazillion videos. Remember, the clinic is acuherbals.com. You can contact us. We have practitioners there 6 days a week, and we have intern clinic 3 nights a week. We've got classes that are a Western program and a Chinese program, both about 2 years long. Both are from beginner to clinician, and a crap ton of standalone classes and some free ones coming up next week. Diet and mental health, and that'll be in person and online, as well as intro to Ayurvedic and doshas, which is on Thursday. So make sure you register for all of those. Jeremias and all my Chinese students, I will see you this weekend and talk about geriatrics and pediatrics and Chinese medicine-y stuff. So you all have a wonderful night. I'm going to go work on some PowerPoints for tomorrow because I never have all of them. So I hope we will do this the last Friday of every month. I'm going to continue to do this until either y'all get tired of it or I do. So you all have a wonderful evening in all the various regions. Go learn your plants, and I hope I see you in a class someday soon. Good night. Now I got to remember how to stop this. Haha, there it is.